Hello and welcome to the Testing Peers. This week we have a special guest, but before we introduce ourselves, let's just talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about testers' growth. And joining me, I've got Simon Pryor.
Hello.
And I've got David Maynard.
Hiya.
And I've got our special guest, Dan Ashby.
Hi.
And I'm Russell. So before we go into our topic, a little bit more detail, I just want to say thank you to Saffron QA. We're delighted they sponsor us. They're a specialist in testing recruitment, offering permanent, contract, and a newly developed retained recruitment service. More details can be found in the show notes. And please reach out to Ben directly to find out more. Who's on banter duty today?
I am on banter duty today, and we're talking about tester growth. So I just wondered, what are you most proud of growing throughout your life? What have you sort of thought, I will grow something, and been really proud of it, even if it was just for 5 minutes before you were brought down to earth? But what are you most proud of growing?
You had to try and get the potatoes back in the podcast at some point, didn't you, David?
Oh, no, it is a vegetable in my case, but not the potatoes. For me, it's actually cucumbers. I was really proud that I grew cucumbers in the greenhouse. And so I ended up with from 2 plants, I think I ended up with 6, but I was really pleased with those. They were a lovely size and I was very flavoursome.
I can't say I've ever been particularly successful at growing anything other than I guess I can sort of half say that I've helped grow my kids. Sunflowers as a kid, I think I only ever had 1 year where one went above my height. Other years, they just tend to die quite early on. So yeah, not been very successful at growing stuff.
I was going to say kids as well, actually. I'm terrible at growing stuff. But I did inherit a nice garden when we moved into this house that had rhubarb growing, actually. We've got some planting boxes and it was full of rhubarb. So that keeps coming up every year. But yeah, apart from that, kids are probably harder though, right?
Agreed.
Keep coming back though, don't they? They're not allowed to let them just go away somewhere. You have to keep looking after them.
And they don't have a dormant phase either, kids.
No. Well, there's a few hours at night, isn't there?
No, not in our scenario. Yeah,
It's debatable. Yeah.
Depends on the age.
Depends how old they are. I haven't got the kids, so I definitely can't say that. I was thinking people versus plants, I have to be honest. I was thinking of careers, kind of helping support people and things like that. Probably there's at least one tester I can think of that have helped kind of grow their career. Obviously, they've done most of the work, to be very clear, but kind of supporting them and helping them, sort of mentoring them and giving sort of feedback and things. It's probably the one I think of most. But otherwise, plant-wise, it's orchids. If I'm going to go down that load, I've managed to keep orchids alive for a while, which is quite good, and they keep flowering every year, so I'm happy.
Oh my God, how do you do that? I'm terrible. They sort of die and wither.
Do you want the honest answer?
Neglect.
By luck and neglect, yeah. Forgetting when I watered them last and occasionally watering them over the top. They seem to love it.
Fair enough.
So there you go.
I'll tell you one thing I'm not very successful at growing, and that's fish. We must have had about 5 or 6 goldfish die in the last 3 or 4 years because either we feed them too much or we don't change the water often enough. And I'm usually the one that's on duty for fish. So it's usually down to we've not changed the water enough. We've not put the right tap safe stuff in that adds chlorine in or whatever else. Yeah, they tend to die.
Adding chlorine in probably wouldn't work.
Well, not chlorine, but it's the dechlorination liquid or stuff that takes the stuff out of the water and changing filters and stuff. It just becomes too much of a hassle.
So you stunt their growth.
Unfortunately.
Well, moving on from stunting growth, let's talk about tester growth. Dan, you came up with the topic of this. Do you want to describe what you were thinking and what we'd like to start the discussion on with?
Yeah, cool. I was thinking that with the current state of the software industry and the IT industry as a whole, it feels like it's quite a difficult period of time for people. So a lot of people are looking for inspiration and motivation. Growth is in line with that, right? People are starting to look at security in their roles, and one way of doing that is growing within their career path. So a lot of people are starting to strive for that and ask more for that when perhaps previously they might have been that might have been like back of the mind rather than front of mind. So yeah, I think it's a really hot topic right now, but there's so much to it. Could make for a good conversation.
There really is.
And it comes from 2 angles as well, right? It's whether you're looking for your own growth or whether you're a leader supporting people, kind of like Russell, what you were saying with growing people, right?
I think it's a really powerful topic, and you're right. And now is a good time to be talking about this because there is a lot of nervousness and unease in the current industry, and that people are starting to question what's my next step? How can I progress? Whether that be financially because of the cost of living crisis, or whether that be more for sort of development because they want to further themselves and they're worried about they could lose their job, so they need to be of the right skill set to keep it or find something better. So yeah, it's a really good one. And I think certainly from a leadership perspective, bringing people on, I'm trying to find ways to create progression in the current situation, trying to create roles or create career paths that allow people to grow into something or have something to aim for. It's a challenge depending on the company setup and the et cetera, but there's definitely a lot of scope to try and find that career path for people.
So, question for you then: who's helped you grow most? Was it a teacher, perhaps at school? Was it more kind of
That's a
career?
good question.
It's a good question.
It's a hard one, isn't it?
I've never really had a mentor. I don't know about whether you've had mentors, but maybe early on in my career, there was managers that helped, but wasn't really from an explicit mentoring perspective. You know, it might have been part of a one-to-ones, but super implicitly. But yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of my growth has stemmed through the community, like being involved in the community. That's where I've learned a lot of things. My career path has changed so many times, you know, even moving into a management role or a coaching role itself and deeper towards agile and engineering. I think you can't really lean on an individual community for that, you know. There's certainly been people like managers and leaders within an organization that's helped inspire me, which is part of growth, I guess. It's a tough question.
Yeah.
I don't think that I've had an individual that's really helped me. I think, a bit like Dan said, there have been people that inspired me and brought the best out of me. But I think I try and be in charge of my own growth because I felt I had to. And okay, you ask for people for help and support by going on training courses or whatever, but actually them helping me to grow are very limited in that particular thing. Another thing about the growth thing is the fact that we are all individuals, so everyone has a different growth pattern or path and different experiences they're coming from. So one of the things we're looking at is sort of a coding academy. So we're using resources that are freely available in order to allow people to learn at their own speed and using the correct resources, rather than paying to put people on a course where only 5 minutes is relevant for what we're actually looking for. It needs to be much more empowering for the individual to actually be in charge of their growth. But on the other side, as you say, Dan, as leaders, we need to help support them so that they're putting their efforts into the right direction to give them that edge up within the company, or even wider, to allow them to CV build, to allow them to put good things on their CV so that if they do choose to move on, they can actually have the best advantage, whatever happens.
It's a good point. I mean, going back to the question about mentor, I've only really had a mentor for the last year, and that's because I was on a company leadership program and they assigned all the members of the leadership cohort a leadership mentor from within the company, which has been brilliant. But it's really been sort of more of an informal chat every couple of weeks over coffee, just to sort of see how things are going and just have someone to sort of throw stuff at that's not within my immediate context, which has been really powerful. But you're right. I think the biggest thing for me has been the community over the last 5-6 years, particularly over the pandemic. I think when, I think everyone turned to the online community to sort of really speak to people. I think that was a massive step forward for learning, growing, finding opportunities to further yourself. The communities as a whole has been a big thing. But it's, as you all said, there's been different people over my career that have really showed support at different points. It really is, like David said, it's very subjective and very individual. You can watch a webinar and 5 minutes of the webinar, you go, oh, that's an interesting point. I might use that. You've grown because you've taken that point on and you've done something with it. So it's really subjective on how you grow.
What I was going to tie on is the different sort of levels of learning. Because what you were saying there around watching a YouTube video and learning, I think this is what helped me actually. Like very, very early on, I realised that in order to learn something myself, if you think about the very first stage of anything is being unaware of something, a topic. And then when you become aware of it, it sparks an interest or not. So you could stop once you become aware of something and not learn. Or if you are interested, then you grow some knowledge on it. So this is where the videos and the books help, but they don't really help with practice and skill and experience.
Application, yeah.
So there's different levels. A video might be a video course with activities in between where you're getting that practice to then start to grow some skills. But you then take that into your working context, and then it's another level of learning. When you start to grow some experience, even at the point where you're getting into teaching that topic yourself, that takes it to that next level of learning, and you start to get to that level of evolution for that topic, strategy and evolution. I had thought about that very early on in my career, and I think that's ultimately what has helped me focus my own growth, like what do I actually want to learn and what do I not, and how do I sidetrack the stuff that I don't want to learn to focus on the stuff that I do, and then just find those resources.
I think that also, though, companies have a responsibility because you need to work potentially for a company that has that growth mindset. They want to enable people and empower people to be able to grow in their careers rather than stagnate, as well as the individual wanting to actually do that. But if you haven't got that culture, then actually you're fighting the system straight away. And actually, if you don't have that understanding or agreement with your line manager or whoever, then you're sort of set up for failure in the first place. However much enthusiasm or whatever, it could well be drilled out of you.
I think it's a really good point. Sometimes you need that environment that enables you to grow. But I also think it can be counterproductive if it's too open for growth, because there's a natural encouragement for you to constantly try and learn something new. And I think I've been guilty of this, and I've certainly sort of helped my team get over this hurdle in the past, where you just want to learn so much. So you're literally watching every video, you're reading every blog, you're following every course, you're listening to every podcast, and you get to the point you're going, well, actually, I haven't actually digested anything over the last week because I've tried too hard to learn something. And actually, you need to sort of get to that right level of, what is it, as Dan said, what is it that I actually want to learn? What can I double down on that will be useful, rather than just taking that scattergun approach of, and I was guilty of it with the MOT blog feed. I'd read every blog that I could off the feed as when they're appearing, and thinking, well, actually 70% of these I'm not getting anything from. And actually I need to pick and choose the ones that I'm going to read and digest and think about afterwards. And that's a key thing with growth, is you have to choose the things that you want to learn more on.
So whose responsibility is it to highlight or help choose what things to actually learn? Is it the individual? Is it the company? Is it your line manager? Is it someone else?
It's the art of learning, isn't it? You've got to learn how to learn, for want of a better phrase, how to filter information, to pick and understand your own learning paths, to pick how much information that you can absorb at one time, whether you're the sort of person that has to demonstrate and demo a technical thing or just has to read it. So I think it is a lot down to people helping you, but ultimately you have to work out what is your learning styles. So you could have people that help you, but ultimately it's a choice. You know you better than anyone else does. So to me, it's others helping you be aware of the constraints, whether you're scattergun in effect and you're trying to pick up everything, which means you don't build deep roots. You don't actually have time to kind of build a strong foundation to stand on. You're actually just kind of trying to flitter in the wind almost and try and pick up everything. Terrible analogy, sorry.
No, I think you're right there. And I think it's a mix, David. To be honest, the answer is, from my perspective, it's you have to want to learn yourself. You have to want to have that desire to learn something new. But also, if you've got someone like a manager or a coach or a leader that's supporting you and helping you decipher what it is you want to learn. And I mean, that's why part of the reason why I've built these learning pathways with my team is sit down and sort of have that conversation about what are your areas that you really want to go into. Not me leading the conversation with, I think you should do this, but more about what are the areas that you think you want to grow into, and then going away and doing my research myself on the back of that and saying, well, I found these courses that could help you in this direction, and building that pathway of courses that together they're going to work through, or they're going to read, or they're going to watch and come back with some kind of learning outcomes on the back of that. Sometimes having a structured learning program like that can help, but it doesn't work for everyone. I think, as Russell said, you have to find the way that you learn best, and that part is on yourself rather than on someone else helping you.
Kind of agree, but I kind of almost want to disagree as well.
Good, we like this.
Because of course there's wants and needs, and there's a lens of autonomy, although it's always constrained autonomy, because there's always the wants and needs of the business, not just the individual. I can't help but feel there's a little bit of sociology in here as well, like relating this back to impact and value to business and stakeholders. So I could say, outrageous example, I want to go and learn knitting, right? So like get my knitting needles out. I want to go and learn how to do this properly. Actually, one that I was actually pushing for was latte art, right? I actually want to go and learn how to do proper latte art. I'm into my coffee. At a previous company, I suggested this, and then they were like, why would we as a business put you through a course on latte art. But for me, I was trying to justify it from a mental health perspective, from actually, if I go and do this, this is something that's going to give me some headspace, right? It's going to give me a release mechanism because I've got my own coffee machine in the house. And if I can focus on that, it's focusing my brain on other things and giving me downtime from stress at work to the point where they've very almost paid for it. There is a lens of autonomy, but within that sort of constraint of business needs, I think you always have to justify if you need money to go and learn something. If it was something that you could learn online for free or via a book that's really cheap, then I think that's different. But if it's an actual course, taking it to that next level learning, right, it's a bit different.
It depends whether this all is, I guess, triggered by your company's needs or your needs or the level in between. Because yeah, if obviously it's something that as an employer that you need people to upskill in, that's a different, I guess, kind of growth. That's kind of employer driven growth. And then you've obviously got kind of your own growth into anything non-testing related, which could be latte art. As you said, there are ways it helps you in your testing regardless, because it gives you that outlet, for want of a better phrase. But yeah, it does, obviously, what is the trigger, I guess, is the question. Because yeah, it does change the responsibilities a little bit. Certainly more responsibility on the business if they are wanting the change, wanting the growth, than it is if the individual just naturally wants to grow.
On that, because I think that is a really interesting point. Do you relate that back in your team or your colleagues or yourself? Do you relate it back to your impact that you're making within your role?
Some training I do, yes. Some training I don't. It's the best way I can answer that. Depends. Impact, I think, is an important part because that's how we measure results in many ways. So you're wanting to grow to probably improve your impact, be it your impact at your home life, your work life, getting better at the job. It's generally there's a reason for wanting it. So yeah, I think impact is an important part that plays to it, but it's not always why you do training, I guess. It is one of the common reasons, but sometimes it is to actually, I'm trying to think if it does, no, I think it does link back to impact always. So all the examples I'm thinking of that I kind of come up with, like, working better in a team, that's impact. But having a broader skill set so you're better at testing non-functional areas, that's an impact. Having more things to judge between, like how to solve a problem, you're increasing your impact again. It always seems to boil back down to there's always a knock-on effect your growth will have on an impact. I can't really draw a example where there isn't an impact from it.
And I think that in today's society, with the cost of living and going back to the original sort of thought about why we chose this topic, because it's people wanting to grow themselves, is that impact is so much more important to the companies at the moment. They need to see that their investment in their engineers' growth is bringing back value and impact on the company itself. So I think that it's really important in today's society that for that impact that they're getting value.
Yeah, even if it's just happiness, that's an impact.
The other side of that, and it's something I've experienced with people in my immediate sphere at the moment, is there's suddenly that panic on their shoulders that they're suddenly like, I need to make an impact. I need to learn this because I need to make more of an impact. And it puts pressure on themselves as well. And sometimes when you're in situations where pressure's involved, that growth isn't as good as it could be. It ends up stunting the growth more because you feel pressured to do something rather than doing it because you actually want to do it. And it can have the opposite effect.
It's interesting because you're talking about generally people just want to make an impact generally and they're panicking about that. But what would happen if, so this is something that I've been experimenting with for the past, I want to say 5 years, with a growth framework that revolves around impact. But if you make impact or the desired impact the starting point and use that to drive what you learn, because to make an impact, you obviously need to have an opportunity to make an impact, but you need to have skills relevant to the tasks around the impact that you want to make as well. And then, of course, there's the behavior and attitude side and the actions that you need to complete to make that impact itself. But if you make the impact the input to drive the learning, I've been finding that it's been quite successful. Like, it's focusing people on, this is what I want to do. This is the outcomes and the impact that I want to make. Now, how can I amplify that? What do I need to learn? And if your growth framework has competencies and skills mapping involved as part of that, then it should be relatively easy to track the competencies and skills that you would need to grow relevant to that impact that you want to make within your role. Might be a little bit different if it's out with your role, because then it might not map to the skills that are designated and described as part of the context of your role. There may be additional ones that you need. It's interesting thinking about people wanting to just generally make an impact, though, if they're not being strategic with what impact they want to make.
Yeah, I've had the conversations where they're keen to progress in their role. They want to do this. They want to make an impact in this particular area, but they're not quite sure how to get there. So that's where, like you say, the growth framework would work. I think part of the problem that I've seen is it's not so much the framework itself. It's more, as you say, the attitude of the people, and they might be keen to learn, but are they keen to learn for the right reasons? Are they taking the right thing in the learning? Are they applying it in the right way, or in a way that makes it effective? So there's a lot of pieces there that growth isn't just about learning a course. It's then about how do you apply that and build it into your day-to-day and show a difference, and measuring a difference in some form as well.
The measuring and the whole impact, it's good because often when we look, I remember when I was starting out and I have to apply for a course or something like that, I wasn't told to say impact. I was always taught I had to give a sort of outcome or a business value. Those statements.
Come and do a presentation when you come back.
Always a presentation.
Yes, those sorts of things. It wasn't impact. Impact, I guess, my interpretation of it, it's something that engages me more by even the word than kind of business value or outcomes, objectives. Learning. What's your learning objectives? Just the word impact. Like, how will this change how you can impact things? How will this impact kind of the rest of the organization? Those phrasing themselves instantaneously engage me more than the other conversation. It's interesting because I hadn't even thought about it, but it does hit some serotonin in my brain or something that works better in that direction. Odd.
Do you know why that is?
I don't.
Because impact is to people, and people in understanding your impact on other people, that's where you get that intrinsic motivation from, that sense of worth and value that you're bringing to people, right?
Okay. Makes sense.
There's an analogy that I like to use actually to connect like OKRs, and people are using OKRs and KPIs, right? Goals and objectives that are measurable. But impact to me is the cherry on top. And there's an analogy that I like to use around a lame sports analogy. It's not football or rugby though. It's swimming. Russell, I'm going to pick on you. If you had an objective to be the fastest person to swim one length of an Olympic swimming pool, that's your objective. Your key result would be the current world record. So you've got a target that's measurable. And if you beat that, then you've reached your objective. And you might have some goals like hire a training team, and a KPI to measure the goal might be a specific amount of people to help train with specific skill sets on different training techniques. Another goal might be a dietary goal. Your KPI might be calorie consumption with certain food groups. So you'd have a bunch of different goals, time spent in the pool or exercise repetitions, right? The idea being that you reach those KPIs, you achieve those goals, it helps you reach that objective, and yay, you're now the fastest person to swim one length of an Olympic swimming pool. Ooh, go Russell, right? But if you stop there, there isn't really much intrinsic motivation. You start looking for the other reward mechanisms, the pay rise, the promotion, the growth. But if you add impact on top, an impact to people, like, yay, Russell, you're the fastest person in the world to swim one length of an Olympic swimming pool, but look at how you've impacted your friends and family that have supported you and cheered you on along the way and given you that inspiration. The next generation that have witnessed what you've done and are inspired to get into the pool, the training team that you hired and their reputation and their own growth, because they've ultimately helped you achieve what you've just achieved. Your competitors, and they're up in their game because they've witnessed what you've done and are inspired to try and beat your new record. And impact to yourself as well, your own brand, your own reputation, your own inspiration to keep going. The connection to people is what gives you that motivation. So totally get what you're saying. We're just even changing the word to impact, or some people use value.
Yeah. It makes a big difference because it does. Best argument ever.
Impact is a far better word. Yeah. I like that analogy. Well done. Thanks. I've got a question more to do with general growth. Do you think it's better to have a breadth of knowledge or a depth of knowledge, or does it depend?
It depends.
I think it depends. Yeah, it depends on the scenario.
It's a balance, an act between them in some ways. It depends on your role. As a leader, I'd argue that a breadth is probably quite often useful, whereas the depth is where the team come in, experts and so on. But
so again, does that go back to Dan's sort of thing of impact and forward thinking? So that if your end goal is to become a manager, you should think of more breadth. if you want to become more technically focused, you should go depth. Or is it, again, does it depend? Dan's shaking his head.
No, but management is a different skill set.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Management isn't the breadth of everyone that you can manage people and support people even if they're not in the same craft as your background.
Yeah.
And that's quite common, right? You have engineering managers managing whole teams of designers and testers, and the engineering manager might be an ex-tester that's moved into that role and hasn't been an engineer before. So it's quite common. I don't think a manager has to have the breadth of every craft or role that they're managing. I still think it's the depth, but on management skills and people skills and psychology and sociology, not just the craft itself. If that makes sense. Maybe from a strategic lens, it's still breadth in terms of the craft as a whole.
The subject area, I guess, is where I'm probably more talking about. Like engineering, you need to have an awareness of how software is built and kind of the constraints of how people work, and that, throwing more people at it won't make it go faster.
And you need to be able to articulate enough about product and about how it's engineered, be able to put that message, manage upwards effectively and talk about the work. But yeah, I get you don't need to know the technical detail to the nth degree from every strand of the...
In most, yeah. As you say, like I've managed developers and all the rest of it. I couldn't write software to save my life. I literally would drown in that swimming analogy previously. To your point, David, I think it depends on what you want to achieve. And I guess every goal has a different kind of outcome, and it depends on the personality you are too. I find that I'm actually quite good at breadth more than I am at depth. I get bored. And I don't want to master one thing to exceptional levels, but I'm average at a lot of things. But it's just my personality type, I think. And it has helped me in some ways. It's hindered me in others. It is just kind of depending upon the person, the problem, the areas. But to Dan's point, breadth of knowledge isn't a necessity for managers. I think it can be useful, but you don't need to know everything about every area. And I certainly get annoyed where people are saying, well, to be the manager of something, you need to be the best tester. To be the manager of testers, it's like, no, you need to be the best manager of people, because motivating, engaging with people is a completely different skill set.
Yeah. It's
crazily different.
It's something we've touched on before about it almost being a brand new job family that you need to go into, and a new skill that you need to start from the bottom again.
It's a different career.
Entry level for moving to management is a different role completely. I think for me that the whole T-shaped or comb-shaped or whatever it ends up being is different per person anyway, so that the breadth of skills that you need to know for your context is different to someone in a similar role in the company. They might have different things they need to be learning as well. So it's very context specific and very almost person specific as to whether they need to be breadth or depth or what have you, depending on the role they're trying to serve. Learning something to a depth is never going to harm you if it's going to help grow the team overall. So it's really down to the specific scenario.
I argue it can sometimes harm you, because if you think you know better, then you're less likely to empower in that area. You're less likely to trust in the team members because you've got the expertise, or you think you have, even though you may be further and further away from the coalface. If you see what I mean, you may believe that you know better, or in your day it was. I've seen managers do that. I'm not saying you do, Simon, but there is an element that as you kind of go into that leadership role, having a depth of knowledge can actually be a challenge that you need to overcome.
I was going to say that actually in every aspect in your career, we should always remember that we can grow in particular places. We should never be complacent that we've reached our pinnacle and therefore we can't grow in any other direction. And I think sometimes people do feel at that top level and that they can't go anywhere. There are always things. And actually, I think it's very human to recognize that actually you're not the expert at everything. You need to learn things at any time, and you can grow in so many different directions. And recognizing that is a really good trait to have, I would say.
I've got one more question, actually. Thinking about growth and in terms of like what I was saying at the start, with a lot of people looking to, whether it is, Simon, what you were saying around people looking for more money because of the economy, but asking for promotions or pay rises. Especially with the promotion part, have you had any experiences in management positions with people trying to game their growth, and how have you overcome that? So you might be there guiding them through learning pathways and things like that, but they're not interested in any of that. They just trying to game the system.
I've had people that have literally gone, I'm already doing the job. I don't need to be proving it. I don't need to learn anything else. I'm already doing it. You need to pay me. You need to promote me. Blah, 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 blah. I'm doing more than this person over here that you already promoted, kind of thing. It sometimes is that thing of, well, I need to see the evidence. I need to have justification for it. You just saying you've done it or should do it isn't gonna solve that problem overnight. Show me something.
It goes back to impact.
Going above and beyond to prove the impact. Exactly. There's always going to be those chances that they're disgruntled that you've promoted somebody else and not them, and they would just think that if they come and talk to you, they're gonna get that promotion.
Sometimes people think just because they've made an impact once that's enough. That's
don't you remember that time I did that?
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, one example. Yeah.
It's a long term. You've got to prove it in the longer term.
Yeah, I've had exactly that, which is people that said, yeah, on the 3rd of September 1922, I did it then once. See, so you need to promote me now, type of thing. It's like you did that once 10 years ago, and now you're saying that's the reason you need to do it consistently. Well, I've done it over years. Let's see, that proves it because I did it 10 years ago. Okay, any more recent examples? And having to have those sort of hard conversations saying, like, doing it once isn't consistent. Some things are hard to do more than once. Let's say, like, creating brand new strategies. I get that they don't come by and you don't do it every, but other things should be quite consistent, like championing for bugs, educating other people, sharing your knowledge. Those are things that should be consistently done versus things that are bespoke, kicking off a project. Most of us don't do that every week. So yeah, I've had people game it like that, definitely, where they come with a checklist. See, example.
I've also had people, and I've had this multiple times over the last 5 or 6 years, is people that have suddenly stated, well, I'm active in the community now. That should be a reason to promote me and that kind of stuff as well. Like, just because they're doing stuff externally suddenly means that that's an instant tick in the box for them to be promoted or growth within the company. And actually, that's something that's, you need to be able to show what you're learning through doing that and bringing it back into the company. And yes, your personal brand is growing, and that's growth in some respects, but what impact is that having on the business? What impact is that having on your job day to day? That's another way that people have sort of tried to push for stuff just because they're doing more externally.
Another thing that is time. People trying to put overtime in and look, I've done all this extra work, but again, does it have impact? Does it add value? Is it needed? Are you putting yourself under extra stress? because actually
time management,
we're not expecting that, and you're not being paid extra. So therefore, do check that it is being recognised for the correct reasons, rather than just assuming that you're doing it.
Good thoughts.
And anything back from you?
How about you?
But yeah, I think this is a few companies ago. I had that situation where we had a growth framework where it was almost worded like tasks. So it was like, if to meet this level, we expect you to be able to blah, 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 right? I remember someone that I used to manage was totally trying to game the system, because one of the things at the next level was run workshops. We expect you to be able to run workshops. And he came saying, I've ran 3 workshops this quarter. And when we actually dove into the details, he had run 3 workshops, but over those 3 workshops, there was 4 people that attended in total. And 3 of them gave bad feedback.
Oh, no.
But he was adamant he'd ran the workshops.
He hadn't ran them, yeah.
Well, yeah, you had to.
Yeah. But it comes back to that impact, right? Mm-hmm. And actually, the way that I changed from that situation, if this was a few companies ago, it changed my mindset and learning about Bloom's taxonomy, actually. So the 6 levels of learning and how they actually can nicely overlay with a growth framework. So rather than it being, we expect you to blah, blah, blah in task form, we expect you to operate at this Bloom's taxonomy level almost. So if you think about, I don't have Bloom's taxonomy in front of me, I think the scale is like, remember, understand, apply, analyze, then evaluate, and then
create.
I think it's evolve in 6 scales, something like that. So if you think about someone that's junior, then the emphasis on them would be remember and understand topics. To reach the mid-level, you're talking about applying, but not just through guidance, but on your own. So you should be able to do this on your own accord. And then analyze would be that sort of next level and looking at the dependencies and asking the questions and being able to experiment further with the topic. And then when you start to get to like senior or expert, or senior expert, that's when you're starting to really evaluate the topic itself, critique it, judge it, lateral critical thinking with it, and then to that point of evolution, the strategy of it. Even at an industry perspective, you might change perception on this topic. That's what the impact framework really stemmed from, is that situation of someone saying, I want a pay rise and promotion.
Yeah.
I ran 3 workshops.
Absolutely. And I think, from that, I think we can tie everything back to the impact. But the Bloom's taxonomy thing is not something I've really sort of thought about linking before, but it's definitely something to take away and look at. And there you go. We've all grown in this conversation tonight. So
I've learned something. Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure.
Hopefully, listeners, you found that useful. If you're on your own growth path, then maybe you've taken something from this that you can take to your own role and your own career to try and help you grow. Thank you, as always, to Saffron QA for sponsoring us and supporting us. If you want to get in touch, then please check out Testing Peers on the socials or contact us at testingpeers.com. And Patreon is still there if you fancy supporting us. We do have a Patreon page. We will be updating it and putting a bit more work in at some point to add some different tiers and different things on there. But it is on our agenda. We will get there. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.